Hello, welcome to this tutorial. Today I show you how you can make this text liquid morph simulation. It's pretty cool. You will need an add-on for this tutorial. It's the first link in the description. If you don't know how to install add-ons, I will show it to you later. But if you already know, just do it right away so you have no work later on. The first thing you want to do, you want to add some text. So just delete the default cube and add in Shift A, go to text, add in the text. By hitting tab, you can edit the text. So I'm just going to write down my channel name, which is Yo-Yo. And if you want to change the font, just go down to the text menu and go to font. And here, that's where you can actually change the font. So I'm just going to click on regular. And I'm just going to search for my font, which is the AW Chubby Regular. It's linked in the description as well, so you can use it. It's free. Next step is to convert this to a mesh so we can actually work with it. So just go right click, convert to mesh. And then just go into edit mode, select everything with A and extrude. Also just shade outer smooth. Now we want to rotate this so it's pointing upwards. Now we want to add our domain for our liquid simulation. Just, add in the cube, scale it up, go into wireframe mode so you know what you're doing, and just align this so your text has some space underneath it. But also, if we set up the camera for later, you will see if your ceiling is too low, think about it. The liquid simulation will interact with the ceiling, so you will have some weird liquid a puddle on the top, and you don't want that. So just make sure that your ceiling is high enough like this and you have some space underneath it. Now we need some geometry to actually generate the liquid from. So I'm just gonna add in a plane, and you want to scale the plane like this. So basically you want to make sure that you don't have that much geometry in front or in the back of the text, but you have some geometry on the left and the right, because we want the liquid to wrap around our text, right? And we don't want that much liquid in front of the text. Next, you need to extrude this. Blender will basically look at the object, and it will populate particles inside of the object. And you want to place this underneath your text like this. Now we will actually apply the fluid simulation basically. So we click on our cube and we go to the physics properties and we hit fluid, and type is domain and domain type is liquid. Click on the text, go to fluid, type is effector, and finally click on the plane, click fluid, type is flow, and flow type is liquid. A domain is basically the space where your simulation takes place basically. So you can see the boundaries of your simulation. It's the same thing with smoke and fire simulation as well, by the way. Effector basically means it's like an obstacle for the simulation to interact with. It will basically behave like a stone in a river. Flow means it's the source of the simulation. This is the place where our liquid is spawning from, in a way. We chose geometry, so Blender will just look at the geometry and it will place particles inside of that geometry based on the size of the geometry, and also how high your resolution in the domain is. Okay, right now I have 32 as a resolution, right? And this geometry is not big enough for this resolution. So I need more geometry basically. I will bring this up, and now you can see that the geometry is big enough for Blender to place in the particles. But if we go back to the default value and we say, okay, we just use a higher resolution, for example, 64, you can see that this geometry is enough for this resolution, right? So it's always a question of, okay, how big is my geometry? How high is my resolution, And you really have to find something that works for your system, because Higher resolution means it's more work for your PC, of course. So in my case, I will use a resolution of 100 and I will use like this amount of geometry, right? Okay, so if I play this back, you will see that the liquid is just falling to the floor and we don't want that. We want it to go upwards. So you can change this by going into the scene properties, go to gravity, and you can see that right now it's set to -9. What this means is basically if you take a look at this gizmo here, you can see like that's the z-axis, right? Like this. And right now it's -9, so everything gets dragged down. And we want to change that by just changing this value to like 1. And now everything gets dragged up by this number because it's positive. It goes to the other direction, right? There we go. And you can already see that it's interacting with our text, and that's what we want. Okay. Now we want to add in the mesh. You do that by going into by clicking the domain, and you go to the physics properties. If you go down to the cache, we want to change the type from being replay to modular. And also you want to check is resumable. So basically, to all the people who don't know what baking is, baking means basically that your PC will, like Blender, will calculate everything before you replay it, right? Like before, I just played it back and it was really laggy and it was really slow because my PC was basically playing it back and it was calculating at the same time. So it was really, like laggy. And baking basically means I'm just going to calculate everything and then you can play it back. So you have like a smooth replay. Here you can specify how long you want to bake, like the frame range. I think 200 is enough. And yeah, it's fine. Okay. Now I want to check mesh. By the way, the default mesh settings are pretty good. I'm just going to leave them. If you want to go into detail and you want to mess around with this, just, hover over the values. You will get a short description on what the value does, so you know what you're doing. One last step is to change meshes from being binary object to object. And what this means is now Blender will take like every frame of our liquid simulation and it will save it as an OBJ. If you don't know what an OBJ is, basically OBJ means it's like a solid mesh, right? Like an object that we can actually import into Blender and that we can mess around with. We will then have like a series of those OBJ files that we can import as one, like a PNG sequence, for example, and then we can play it back, right? And that's why we need the add-on, by the way. So we can actually import the mesh sequence. By default, Blender can't do this. Change that to object, and then we can go up and bake this. Before we bake our mesh, we need to specify where all those like single OBJ files will be stored. So you can do that if you just click on the folder icon, and that's where you can specify the folder. Make sure that you can find the folder and you know where all those OBJ files are stored at. Okay, after that you will just want to hit bake mesh. Sometimes Blender is just calculating this really fast and basically like nothing happens, right? Just hit free mesh, go up, free data, and just bake the base data again. And afterwards you just bake the mesh and then it should work. Okay, so so now I just bake my mesh again. Bake mesh. The mesh is baked, and at this point we are done with our liquid simulation. You can see it works and it looks pretty cool. Yeah, so now you can just hide the cube, like the domain, and you can also hide the plane that was underneath the text, okay? And now our add-on comes into play. So if you don't know how to install the add-on, I will show it to you. Just download the zip file that is linked in the description below on the GitHub page, I guess. And then in Blender, just go to Edit, Preferences, and go to Install, right? On add-ons, just go to Install, and then, you know, just click the zip file that you downloaded and just install add-on, okay? Once your add-on is installed, just search for stop motion OBJ, check the little box, and then click Save Preferences, and then you can close this. Now we will import our OBJ mesh sequence, right? And by installing the add-on, you now have one more option when it comes to import. We now have the option to import mesh sequences. So just click that, go to the folder that you specified earlier in the cache tab, and your folder will look like this as well. So it's config, data, and mesh. Go to mesh, and don't click anything here, just type in the name of your mesh sequence. So in my case, it's fluid_mesh, fluid_mesh. By the way, if this is checked for you, material per frame, this means that every single frame of your mesh sequence will have its own material, and we don't want that in this case. So if it's checked, just uncheck it. Okay, and then just hit select folder. And now Blender will import your mesh sequence depending on your machine, and I think depending on like the range of your bake and the resolution of your bake, yeah, this can take a while. You know, just be patient. Okay, so you can see that our mesh sequence is important now. If I play this back, you can see it's working. I can actually like tap in, and you can see we have vertices and everything, so it's crazy. Okay, so now we have to align this mesh sequence with our text again. I will flip this. Here's the thing. You don't have to align this 100%. Just, you know, just eyeball it. Like something like this works, I guess. You know, maybe like this. Okay. So if I play this back, you know, it looks fine to me. So here comes the magic. In order to morph these together, we will use geometry nodes, and don't be afraid. We will use it only for really like a really simple operation. So, you know, I know that geometry nodes can be really intimidating at times. Just click on geometry nodes and hit new, or go to your modifier stack and go to and select geometry nodes from here. Okay, and then click new. Like you can see, we have our fluid mesh sequence right here. So what we can do, we can just drag it in into our text geometry nodes setup, and then we can just search for join geometry. Oh, join geometry. And that's how we can combine the mesh sequence with our original text. Also, make sure, like right now, you can see if I hide the original fluid mesh sequence, you can see our fluid mesh sequence instance in the geometry nodes is located here. And just, you know, just click on relative, and now it has the same position as the actual original fluid mesh sequence that we aligned with the text. Okay, so that's fine, right? And in order to morph these together, we will use a simple remesh modifier. So just select the text, go to add modifier, and underneath your geometry nodes, you want to add the remesh modifier. It doesn't work if it's like in front of that. It has to be after your geometry node setup, right? And then you can just lower the voxel size. Okay, maybe even less, maybe like 0.01. Okay, so that looks fine to me. Also, make sure that you enable smooth shading. Okay, so you can see that we have some ugly edges, and you can fix this by adding another modifier. You can add the smooth modifier. And if you now play around with the factor, like put it up to maybe like 5.1 in my case, you can see this helps, right? But yeah, you really have to play around with these settings here. If you step up the repeat, this can also help. In my case, this is enough, but you know, just play around with these settings until you have something that looks decent. One thing I forgot, just, you know, hide the smooth shader and hide the remesh shader, and also the geometry nodes shader for now. I want this text to wobble, right? I don't want the text to be just, you know, static. So in order to do this, to achieve this, we will, first of all, we will remesh this text so we have a lot of geometry to play with. So after your fluid modifier, you want to add a remesh modifier, right? Like, wait, now it's, okay, now it's at the bottom of the stack. Just take it and drag it up and just lower the voxel size until you actually can see the text. Maybe like 0.015 or something. Hit smooth shading. Looks fine to me. And then just apply the remesh modifier, okay? So you can see now we have actually some geometry. And now I want to add another geometry node setup. Go to geometry nodes and then just drag this up again so it's in front of your of the other geometry node setup, and just click new. Okay. So basically, in order to make this like wobble, you want to use a set position node. Okay. Set position node. So now we are like changing the location of the text, you could say, right? And we want to distort this text on the X and the Y axis. We will add a noise texture, like this, noise texture. We will add a combine XYZ. And we will add a vector math, okay? Okay, so basically we say, okay, use this noise texture on the X and the Y axis to distort this text, right? And here's the thing, if I just plug it in, like into the offset, you can see we get this, right? Which is like, actually it's fine if we just change this noise texture to 4D and we lower the scale. You can see it's basically doing what we want, but it got moved away from the original like position. The noise texture, because it's a value from 0 to 1, will move the text on the like average value between 0 and 1, and the average value is 0.5, of course, which is like the middle value. So we have to compensate for that, right? So what we will do is basically, okay, take this value that we get from here, like the distortion, with the like the 0.5 movement, and feed it into here. And then we just subtract 0.5 from it, right? Like on every axis. And now we have the distortion, but we have the original position, okay? So that's what's happening here. Now we can drive this distortion with a scene time node. So just search for scene time. Just plug in the seconds into the W value. And basically what's happening here, like the W value is more or less like a seed value, right? We can drive this with the seconds of our Blender scene, basically. Okay. And if we play this back, you will see that like it works. And if this is too slow or too fast for you, like whatever the result is for you, you can modify this by hitting by adding a math node. Just put this from add to multiply, and if you want it to be slower, just multiply it with 0.5, right? And if you want it to be faster, just put it to some value above 1, so maybe like 1.5. I just want to mention that I just rendered the whole thing, and the wobble speed is way too high. Like on the text, you like if you just copy my settings, you definitely have to change that. So in your geometry node setup, in the first one of your stack, just make sure to maybe like put the multiply node, put that to divide, and then divide it maybe like 2 or like 3 or something, and that way your text should have a really nice motion. So before you do your final render, maybe do one test render in Eevee or something, you know, so you just make sure that your wobble speed of the text is not too high. At this point, we can just enable all the modifiers again. So if I do this, yeah. And by the way, right now you can see that the liquid simulation for some reason is not inside of our text. We can change this by just enabling the original fluid mesh sequence, selecting it, and just move it back, right? So it's inside of our text again, like this. This would be a good situation to save, by the way. The last step is to add a material and a scene and some like lights. So for the material, you just go to the second geometry nodes setup. And at the end, you want to add in a set material node, okay? Add in a material, and we call it maybe like fluid shader or something. And now we can select that material inside of geometry nodes. Okay, so we will use a gradient texture as a mask if you have Node Wrangler enabled. If you don't, just go to Edit, Preferences, Add-ons. It's a built-in plugin, so you don't have to download anything. Just search for Node Wrangler and enable it. If you have that add-on enabled and you click your gradient texture and hit Control T, you will get those two nodes. And now we can rotate our gradient texture, right? Hello, it's future me again. So I found that I haven't really explained this well enough. If we take a look at the gradient texture, you will see that for me it's rotated and positioned like this. And you do this by playing around with these values. So you can see right now I'm rotating on the Z-axis, and I can manipulate the texture in 3D space, basically. The goal here is to achieve like this look, basically. So you want to rotate the text, like for example, if the texture is like this, you have to rotate it to the left, so you get this, and then you have to position it with the X, Y, or Z. Like it depends on your scene, basically, how your object is positioned. But you want to position the gradient texture so that it's covering up like the top part of your text that is morphing into the liquid, right? So you have the bottom part of the text that is like solid, and then you have like this edge part, like this part basically, where the text is morphing into the liquid, right? So that's the goal here. Yeah, I hope you understand. If you don't, just leave a comment and I will explain it. You want to use this as a mask. So I am gonna add in another shader. So principled BSDF. I mean, you can just duplicate this as well. And then you want to add in a mix shader node, okay? Like this. You want to plug in the two principled BSDF shaders, like this. And now we will use the gradient texture that we just created as a factor. So it works as a mask, basically. So in our case, if I switch to cycles and put this to GPU compute, and I go into render mode, if I change the color, okay, So right now, everything that was white in the gradient texture is taken from this principled BSDF, right? I'm just gonna take the transmission to 1 and lower the roughness. I bring the saturation to 0 again, so it's like water, basically. And for the other material, maybe like a metallic texture, bring down the roughness so it's shiny. Finally, I will add a plane and I will make a backdrop. If you don't know how to make a backdrop, it's pretty easy. Just select the the edge of your plane with the edge select tool and extrude it up. And then just select the new edge basically and just hit Control B to bevel. All right. Okay, and then just shade smooth. Okay guys, so for the final render, I I changed some stuff and I want to quickly go over it. So first of all, I added some lights in. So I have one like area light in the front with like 200 power, and then like 2 in the back with 50, like on each side. So the back of the text is already like has some lighting as well. For the material of the text, I chose some like for the bottom part I chose some like cyan color, so it's complementary to the backdrop. For the backdrop, it's just an emission shader basically, so I just chose my color and then I set this emission strength to 1 basically. And finally, like for the backdrop, I also just took the whole backdrop and just moved it down a little bit, so I only have like this like red wall in the background and like no floor at all. And finally, for the camera, I parented the camera to an empty, so I can actually rotate the camera around the text. So the camera is basically like, you know, like animated now because it's following the empty, and the empty has some rotation keyframes on the first and the last frame. And also I added some depth of field. So you can add that by just going into the camera settings, check depth of field, and then you can play around with your f-stop, with your focus. If you want to see your focus, you can just go to viewport display and show limits. Check that and you will get this like yellow thing, like this yellow point basically that's indicating where your focus is. Yeah, so that's pretty much it. That's it for the tutorial as well. So I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you learned something. You know the drill. Leave a like if you enjoyed this one. Subscribe to the channel, and you know, if you have any like trouble or something, or like wishes for the next tutorial, just comment down below. And yeah, I see you in the next one.